We are just days away from a brand new Ryan Murphy season of Monster. Yes, you know the hit series Monster, and I said hit series. I know Dahmer and Menendez Brothers was controversial, but they are a big deal for Netflix. So that's why I think Ed Gein has a lot of hype as we're heading into its premiere on Netflix this coming week. But before we get into that, I want to take us all the way back in between the time of Nip Tuck and Glee when Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk were pitching a show that never came to be. We're going to be looking at Pretty Handsome, the pilot episode of a series that we could have been unleashed onto our world. My goodness, I don't know with the controversy that this would have started, but we're going to be looking at about whatever happened to the series Pretty Handsome. Looking back at the series Pretty Handsome, which was originally titled 4 Ounces, Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk shot this pilot in late 2007, which was the original development, and it was pitched in 2008. The pilot was produced by FX. When FX passed on it, it was shopped around elsewhere by 20th Century Fox Television. It just never had a time to shine. It never found its place in the world of television. It's funny looking back at Pretty Handsome now because it seems controversial, this idea of Bob Fitzpaine, a gynecologist who's journeying through his gender expression, trying to find out who he is on the woman inside, and how he becomes that beautiful woman he knows that he can be. That, on the bare bones, is a pretty normal plot, but in 2007, 2008, we weren't ready for trans representation on television. Most of the time, we still were getting real cringy, not great representation, and we could have maybe seen that possibly with, Pretty Handsome. Not to say that this would have been flawless. You look at how he represented the trans community on Nip Tuck. It could have been controversial, but the bare bones of the story with Bob Fitzpaine going through his gender identity, it doesn't seem to be that shocking. It's a very bare bones idea that I think was too ahead of its time. Is that good? Yeah, sure. I love that we had Ryan Murphy thinking way in advance. Him and Brad Falchuk really had this idea of Pretty Handsome, which would again fit into 2025 television very well, but it was too unheard of. It was too wild for 2008.
No escape from reality.
Getting into more details of the show, we look at Bob Fitzpaine, played by Joseph Fiennes, a married gynecologist and father who comes to realize that he wants to transition. We had Carrie-Anne Moss in the series, who played Bob's wife. We had Jonathan Groff, a Ryan Murphy regular, playing one of Bob's sons. We also had roles for people like Jessica Lousden, and we had Sarah Paulson, Blythe Danner. There was a lot of people in this cast, some people who would end up being Ryan Murphy regulars later on, but throughout the series, we would see Bob's secret life where he's wearing women's garments, he's experimenting with cosmetics. All of that would have been exposed throughout the show, but in our bare bones beginning of it, just the pilot, we were just getting a bit of a taste. Well, the central arc was Bob's journey of his gender expression and finding out the woman that he was on the inside. The show would have also figured out how to handle the family dynamic. How did everyone else react to this news? It's funny thinking of something like the Caitlyn Jenner situation years later, which was this big tabloid sensation, and seeing how all the different family members reacted to it. Again, this show being so ahead of its time, and they also had plans for multiple seasons. I know we only shot the pilot, but doing my research, we saw that there was going to be plans of, a whole season of Bob telling his family, a whole season of these surgeries, and then the final season would have been Bob's adjustment into his new womanhood and finding out love and where he feels like he places in life. All of that would have been so intriguing. Again, like a 5-season arc of a gender expression, a gender identity, Bob's journey to being whoever he wanted to be. It's mind-blowing. It's crazy. And then getting into the family dynamics, this truly could have been ahead of its time. A moment of television that would have been talked about, again, predating the Caitlyn Jenner situation, which was to me one of the biggest trans breakthroughs in the mainstream, even though Caitlyn Jenner now
9/11.
Not my favorite girl, but it was still a moment in pop culture that I think shifted, and I think the Pretty Handsome show would have started that conversation years before Caitlyn Jenner even came into the picture. Some critics of the pilot noted that the pilot leaps quickly into transition scenes, which raises the question, after that, what would have been left to develop? The tone was reportedly that very signature Ryan Murphy use of dark humor and provocative edges, but this one had a bit of a humanist depth to it.
I get all my produce at Blacker Brothers.
Yeah, well, they charge twice the price for everything.
Darling, money talk, vulgar.
Which is intriguing because Ryan Murphy, especially at this time, struggled with making people feel human and not just wild, bold characters. There was some concerns about it being heavy-handed metaphor, and there was a bit too over the head and on the nose, but overall, I think a plot like this needed to be obvious, especially at this time. At the time, Ryan Murphy described this series as a labor of love, something he really put his heart and soul to it. So when that pilot was denied, it could have been an easily heartbreaking moment, and you do see that a bit with Ryan Murphy, because him and Brad Falchuk quickly shifted their gears to Glee, which was a more mainstream, a more accessible story, and that was kind of maybe the issue here. Was this show accessible enough? Could it had advertisers? Could it angered a more conservative audience while also still angering the trans community, the LGBTQ community at that time that was hungry for representation? But a lot of us fall into that category is sometimes no representation better than bad representation, and we don't know where Pretty Handsome would have lied there, but a lot of us were a bit nervous, and you can kind of see that pushback even with some of the early reactions to that pilot episode. So on top of the scaredness that the studio was feeling, we also had issues with advertisers. We also had issues with tone. No one knew the tone of the series. Was it going to be like something like Nip Tuck, something people were familiar with, or would it be something more like Pose, which we would see decades, like almost decades later on, being a full, more realized, a more earnest and a more heartfelt look at the trans experience? I can see where the hesitations lie. I love this idea on paper, but I know execution is hard, especially for Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk. These are two filmmakers I respect, but sometimes the tone, maybe what they're pitching, does not come across in the final edit as what they intended. So I can see Pretty Handsome running into issues exactly along those lines. I don't want to say that there was a beef between FX and Ryan Murphy, but you can see the relationship was strained a bit because Ryan Murphy left his home at FX, which he made there with Nip Tuck, and went over to Fox with Glee. Glee was such a dominant force, but it would only take a couple years before Ryan Murphy ventured back to FX with his series American Horror Story. This series would dive into trans characters, people like Liz Taylor. The series was definitely more fitting for what FX was looking for, especially at that time. This was like around the first season of Walking Dead, so Murder House coming around then was it just fit in well, and it was able to kind of tell a story people were used to, get people used to the Ryan Murphy world, more than just Nip Tuck, and then more than just Glee, so then we can see Ryan Murphy be able to evolve, get people comfortable. It's kind of the idea of, I always used to say on dates, I don't want people to see the full, real EJ yet, so I'm going to let them know just a little bit of me, just get a little bit of taste, and then give them the full me. That's what Ryan Murphy did here with American Horror Story. He was just like, okay, you guys didn't like Pretty Handsome, but wait, know who I am, know what kind of storyteller I am, know what I can do, and then you'll give me something like Pose we would get years later, which, my goodness, I'm so happy that Pretty Handsome, sometimes I'm happy Pretty Handsome does not exist, so we could have got something like Pose, and it felt so organic with people like Janet Mock and Our Lady J being such a key part to that. I don't know if in 2007, 2008, that Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk would have invited trans people to work on the story, because that just wasn't how pop culture was. That just wasn't what the landscape of how we created. We weren't really inviting in these people from these communities to give us their perspective. We were just writing stories for them. So, it's good and bad that this never happened, and I'm glad that it never really broke up the relationship between FX and Ryan Murphy, because my goodness, we would have never got AHS. Pretty Handsome does not have the legacy of a lot of other Ryan Murphy projects because, again, it was just a pilot episode, but you can see that it had a general impact on Ryan Murphy as a creator. The massive pivot that he made to Glee, which was a bit more of a mainstream, a bit more of an accessible show, which he would later talk about trans issues on that show and things like that. You can definitely see that this was a moment where Ryan Murphy, it was a shift for him as a creator. He talks about that a bit in interviews and things along that line, where he was just like, this was a a wake-up call for him almost, just going, what do I need to do to focus on? And again, I like that this led us to having a better Ryan Murphy trans experience later on, but we can also see that we had a time where we weren't ready. We weren't ready as a society, I think, for this show. I think we were definitely just on the cusp of it, but I love that Ryan Murphy said, let's put a pin in that. Let me see if I can use my clout later on that I'm going to build with things like Glee, with things like American Horror Story, so I can get that recognition that this community deserves. And again, I like, Joseph Fiennes, but, I would have loved a trans woman in this role, or a genderqueer person. And I think, again, waiting just that little bit, we were able to get people like Michaela J. We were able to get Dominique Jackson. We were able to get these amazing actresses who got to show off their stuff on Pose, where I don't think Pretty Handsome would have had that same representation. While 2025 is a weird year for the Ryan Murphy community, like we have no American Horror Story this year, and we're awaiting the release of All's Fair, the legal show. Then we also have Ed Gein, the new season of Monster. This is just an interesting time to look back at Ryan Murphy before everything that we know nowadays. I've been a fan since Nip Tuck, but my goodness, to look back at a show that I only found out about just a couple weeks ago, just finding out that this existed and then didn't exist. It was wild to find, but I'm just happy that Ryan Murphy's legacy still stands as a massive impact on television. He is a producer, a filmmaker, a creator that is so integral to a lot of our modern television. So I'm happy that this show existed even in its small thing. I think Pretty Handsome's pilot episode is just a small bit of what he can do, and it's just a small little part of his legacy that it would eventually give us something like we have now with our massive Ryan Murphy universe. Overall, I really think Ryan Murphy's Pretty Handsome was way ahead of its time, an interesting show that could have been a big splash, good or bad. It could have been a big deal in pop culture, but we just have the pilot episode to talk about. Thank you guys for joining me for this small retrospective of what could have been, what Pretty Handsome should have been, could have been, and would have been. My goodness, what would this be like? What is the Ryan Murphy universe like if Pretty Handsome was got its 5 seasons? We'll never know, but we live in this world now that I want to know your thoughts. What are your thoughts on Pretty Handsome and his idea? Were you interested, hearing the early talks of this show? Did you never hear about this before? Share your thoughts down in the comments below. Subscribe to my channel if you want more videos based on the Ryan Murphy universe. Like I said, All's Fair is coming. We got Ed Gein to talk about. There's a lot to get into, and the Beauty next year is supposed to be this year, but we got it next year. My God, there's a lot to talk about. So share your thoughts down below, subscribe, give me a thumbs up if you did enjoy this, and let's talk about Pretty Handsome right down below.